Yo, hey guys, it's me, Anchor64 again for another video. Um, Pretty much when I made my last video, when I was talking about some of the warrior changes we will see in TBC, I was pretty much surprised by how many views I got, like how quickly. I got like 2k in 2 days and also got like 44 likes, which is even way more impressive. So yeah, people I guess like to maybe listen to me talk about TBC, and I thought for this video, actually I wanted to make like a talent video, but yeah, for warriors especially, but I quickly realized I kind of forgotten to talk about some of the stat changes we will see in TBC. This is a pretty important topic. This video in general will also be long, since there are a lot of stat changes I want to go over. I don't want to explain everything, but pretty much the most important things. And this is also more of a general video for also other classes. At the end of the video, I will pretty much focus on warriors specifically, since there are like some extra stuff. And I want to kind of explain why certain things affect us as warriors at most for the TBC changes. But at the start, I just want to talk about some general things. So yeah, first of all, thank you for like watching my previous video. And now I kind of want to make a similar one, but just for stats. Again, if you have any other questions or so on, feel free to ask and such. Also helps like the algorithm and so on. I'm happy like to answer any questions and so on. Again, TBC is like my favorite expansion. I'm pretty hyped going into it. So yeah, but that's I think enough for the intro. So let's go over some of the changes. Again, I will start with some general changes. That is pretty much like every class is pretty much affected by this. So you have like also, if you are not playing a warrior, this will also affect you. One of the famous, I would say more famous examples I can show you here is actually this item here, which is a rejuvenating gem. One important thing here is we had a pretty big problem in vanilla. That being, if you were a healer and you had a lot of really good healing gear, so you were really pumping in raids and such and dungeons and so on, but solo content was pretty miserable, since none of the healing gear really gave you any spell power. For example, rejuvenating gem, you can see it right here, gives you only healing and some mana per 5. So for solo content, that really sucked for healers. They had either have a dual spec, which of course Classic Anniversary gives you, so it's like way easier for, like that problem isn't really a thing on Anniversary, but in general, of course, back then they didn't have dual spec. So what they did in TBC is something that is pretty interesting, and they added some spell power to every single item which only had pretty much healing on it. So for example, if you look at the TBC version of this item, we can see it has 66 healing, didn't really change here, but it also has 22 spell power. And this is true for pretty much every single healing item, even for tier pieces. So for example, we have the Ring of Redemption. This one is like the... Actually, let me just pull it up. You can get this in Extremas. This is like the tier 3 ring for paladins. And the classic version only had 37 healing on it, and also some mana per 5 and some other stats. But the TBC version will also give you some spell power additionally. This will be also pretty important for protection paladins. Paladins right now are kinda in a, let's say, they are kinda in holy paladin jail, I would say. Especially people who really want to place other specs, like reds or tanks. They can't really, since they are pretty useless. However, this is something that will help them. Let's say you have like a full tier 3 or a lot of like bis healing pieces. It will help you a bit gaining some spell power for your protection spec, for example. Because protection paladins, that's something that's really unique to them. They really want a lot of spell power. I also love that kind of iteration for protection paladins. Pretty much my favorite because it's so unique. But whatever. Yeah, you can see it here. Also things, for example, like pure Elementium bands. If you remember that one, pretty contested item. I see it like HR'd all the time on anniversary servers. this one also gives you some spell power. So yeah, if you have a lot of healing gear, and you can perfectly use that as well for some leveling solo stuff in the pre-patch, this will immediately hit us in the pre-patch. So whenever we are going to get hit by the pre-patch in January, this is something I also really don't like. I wish it was already next month. No, you need to wait another month, then you can actually play the pre-patch. But yeah, in January, when the pre-patch is going to launch, this is something that will immediately be true. Basically, in the pre-patch, everything is already there. The only thing we can't really do is we can't level yet, and we can't go out to Outland. That's kind of it. Everything else is already there, to be honest. So yeah, that's like it for this change. So healers have some bonus stats they are going to get here. Another big thing, this is more related to leveling, is dungeon gear will get massive upgrades. So for example, I will just pull up one item here. And one thing we had always in dungeons in vanilla is we had a lot of green level items. We had, of course, items that were blue, but also we had a lot of green level items. This is something TBC will slightly change here. So you will see that a lot of items are going to be upgraded to blue level items in dungeons. For example, we have this belt. The vanilla version, if you want to look at that, that is a comparison. This one had 45 armor, 5 strength, Black Hand Defier's belt, dropped in Deadmines of course. The TBC version gives you 5 more armor, doesn't have any strength anymore, but gives you 18 attack power instead, which is of course way better, especially at that early often level. So this is pretty much true for many dungeon items. This will of course making gearing and so on way easier. One thing that is just true in general is in vanilla, that's also part of the charm of vanilla. We have a lot of items which have really weird stats on them. You have like maybe stuff with intellect, strength, and whatever, like weird different variations of stats. And that is something you will see less in TBC. A lot of the items will get changed. They will get more pretty much brought to line, which so actually you can actually use them and they are not that bad. This will happen to a lot of items, so even items will get changed in a way where they actually will receive spell power even early on while you are leveling. This was something that was not really true in vanilla. Items with spell power early on while you were leveling were pretty much not really a thing. Like you couldn't really get any. This was something I remember, for example, my friend played a paladin and he wanted to try out some how actually consecration would scale with spell power, maybe while leveling, try it out a bit, but yeah, there was no real gear of spell power while you were leveling. So this is something you will also see. You will have access to spell power way earlier, which is of course a pretty nice thing as well. So yeah, in general, leveling will of course become way easier in TBC. There's also another change where of course you will need way less XP. All of these pretty much adds to like a way smoother experience. There will be less elite level mobs. Some of the changes are kinda not complete advantages since they kinda remove some of the charm of vanilla. For example, like removing elite level mobs and so on. And Red Ridge is one famous example. But yeah, that's not the topic of this video. But this is also something you can see here. You will see some different dungeon items in TBC. And in general, they're really going to you really are going to see less and less of these weird items with just weird stats on them, and you will actually see more solved items, like correct items, you would say, more optimal items for the different class and specs. Good, so we have that also explained. Now I kind of want to go over some of the new stats we are going to get. One important thing here is in TBC, we will also see a lot of different stat changes. Some of the classes also will receive some changes as well in combination for that case. And also we will see some new stats. We will also see some replacements. A lot is actually going to happen. One, for example, I can immediately show you that will affect hunters especially. I don't want to talk about all of the class changes, but this is a pretty important one since it will affect items directly. Hunters, for example, right now in vanilla, they receive like 2 ranged attack power per agility. This will get changed, so they only receive 1 ranged attack power per agility. This was done so hunters don't really need to chase items which only have agility on them, and also can go for some other stuff. However, in exchange, that is pretty much the like way better buff. Their pets actually receive some of their ranged attack power as their melee attack power, so they get some scaling with the hunter. So if the hunter has like a lot of ranged attack power, the pets also become really strong as well. And yeah, pets were kind of useless in vanilla, but that's just something I want to talk about here. That's why you see some items that were kinda bound to hunters being changed a bit. One more famous example of this one is Prester's Talisman of Carnivory. I talked about this item when I made my video, like items you can bring into TBC. The vanilla version of this item is pretty simple. It only gives you like 30 agility, only. This is a pretty much huge amount of agility, and it gives you 1% hit, a pretty simple item. In TBC, it will lose 5 agility, so it only has 25 agility. It will have 10 hit rating. I will explain that in a bit, what that even means. But it gains 22 attack power, which is something where you can see, okay, they have some changes here already. Of course, 22 attack power is a pretty big amount. This is pretty much done, so we have some flexibility on the items. But yeah, this is not the only item that has this kind of change. There are like multiple items, but this is one of the ones I pretty much also immediately remember. But yeah, you have that as well. One of the big changes you already can see on this item are ratings. Basically, one problem we have in vanilla, actually not really a problem in vanilla, but of course later, if you think about later expansions, is that all of our items have percentage-based buffs. So let's see, maybe let's look at Blackhand's Breath. Let me go to Classic. Let me open this item. Oh man, am I stupid? Okay, not Breath. Yeah, this one. So this is a trinket you can gain from a quest, and it gives you 2% crit. One problem is if we think about like getting upgrades and so on, how does this work exactly? Like how would this work if you have like a new expansion with new gear and so on? 2% crit in general, it's always going to be, again, 2% crit is always going to be really strong. So they had to come up with an idea, what can they do? What would be a good idea to do? And basically what they did is they pretty much stripped every single percentage-based buffs from gear and turned it into ratings instead. So if we look at the TBC version of this item, instead we will have 28 critical strike rating. Now you would maybe ask, okay, what does this mean? What is critical strike rating? I only know about percentage-based buffs. Percentage-based buffs are pretty easy to understand. You have, of course, your crit rating. It's of course a percentage number, and if you get an item which gives you 2% more crit, that's 2% more crit, that's it. And now this thing kinda throws a wrench into everything. Again, we need to make some additional calculations. So we have like some additional, let's say, middleman inside. Basically, you would get this item, we would get critical strike rating, we would need to translate that one into percentage-based buffs again, and then we could apply that one to our stats. Which is of course more complicated, but this was pretty much a necessary thing, unless you wanted to have items which would give you 4 or 5% crit in TBC, and I think that would be, yeah, too much, to be honest. Like the power creep would have been really insane then. How ratings basically work is they pretty much give you a certain amount of percentage-based buffs depending on your level. At level 60, so all the items we own currently, are basically going to get translated into ratings, but they are still going to keep the same amount of percentage-based buffs. I will show you an example which explains this way more easily, because just talking about it is really complicated. But yeah, don't worry, I will show you an example pretty soonish. So that's something that they have done for every single percentage-based buff of your stats. So you can think about hit rating, critical strike rating, spell hit, things like that. Stuff that didn't get changed at all are pure stats. Things like spell power, things like also spell crit also got, of course, ratings, translated into ratings. Things like spell power didn't get changed, attack power didn't get changed, healing power, of course, also didn't get changed. So this is also always the same. So what this means, basically, these kind of items also gain some value in TBC. One thing we have right here is, for example, Kiss of the Spider. Kiss of the Spider will actually be nerfed, kind of, in TBC. This is not really going to affect us in the pre-patch, since all of these stats are going to get translated into the version we have right now. So basically 14 critical strike rating is still 1% crit, 10 hit rating is still 1% hit, 200 haste rating is still 20% haste. However, if we are just going to get one more level, all of this is going to change and we will actually lose out on some stats, since we will need more ratings to achieve 1% again. But I will show you an example later, which makes this really abundantly clear and is really way easier to understand. But just so we have that. So this item, of course, is going to be worse at level 70 than it was at level 60, since it will just give you less stats. Same thing for also Mind Quickening Gem, which you can see here. So this item, what it used to do is it gives you 33% haste, which is pretty insane. However, in TBC, this will get translated into haste rating. This doesn't really mean much at level 60, it's pretty much the same amount. However, at level 70, it's going to be way less haste. This is something they did. This is pretty much something that is going to be true for all of the items that kind of work in a similar way. So just so we have that as well. That's why, for example, Slayer's Crest, an item where I would say in vanilla, this one is pretty much a worse item than Kiss of the Spider, for warriors, for example, is actually going to get way more value in TBC, since this is not going to receive any nerfs. You can see, we can look at this item, it gives you 64 attack power base, and it also gives you 260 attack power if you use the on-use effect. If you look at the classic version, it's still the same thing. Didn't really change at all. That's what I mean by some stats are not going to get changed at all. They're pretty much going to stay the same. There's an item which you can get from the Badge of Justice vendor, which is pretty much this trinket, but a bit better. Which is this one, Bloodlust Brooch. If you just compare it, it has 72 attack power and it gives you 278 attack power for 20 seconds if you use the on-use effect. So it's slightly better, but you can already see this one is a level 70 trinket, which you can get from Badges of Justice, which are going to be, of course, at the start harder to get. But if you already have Slayer's Crest, you could perfectly keep using it and use your Badge of Justice for something else instead, since it's pretty much kind of the same item, just with less attack power. But that's what I mean, like raw attack power is not going to receive any nerfs here. So also things like, for example, Mark of the Champion. That's what I talked about in my video when I was talking about items and so on you can bring into TBC. They are going to stay the same. Same amount of spell power, same amount of attack power. However, other stats are not that lucky. So whenever you see an item right now in vanilla which has some percentage-based buffs, you can pretty much think of, okay, this item is going to be less usable in TBC, especially at a higher level. Good, so I have that. kind of a lot to talk about here, but again, like I said, this is more of a longer video, and I kind of want to have like most of the important stuff here. So we have that. Is there an example I can actually show you? So this is easier to understand. Yeah, there is. So let me show you this warrior here. It also has my name, but I wish my warrior would look like this. Sadly, it doesn't. But yeah, this is pretty much these are pretty much the best items you can get right now in Next Rammers on warrior. So yeah, full bis, kind of. For example, you would probably replace this with Mark of the Champions, and yeah, whatever. This is not really that important. What is important, however, all of the stats here we can see, and you can see like all of the enchants and so on. That's already done here, and at the bottom we can see these amount of stats here. If you don't know what the site is, it is 60 upgrades. You can also see it's like kind of orange, and also it says classic error. So this is a classic error version of 60 upgrades. This will become important later. But you can see I have 11% hit and 24.89% crit. So now you would maybe ask, okay, what is going to happen if I take this character and go into TBC? Like, I bet my stats are going to change massively. Everything's going to be way different. This is going to be really complicated because all of these stats are going to get changed into ratings. Actually, it's pretty simple. So let me show you the same character, but in TBC, and also simulate this character, of course, at level 60, not 70. So it makes sense for the pre-patch. So this is the same character here, but this is the Burning Crusade 60 upgrade site. You can see this is one screen, and also this character has like the Illidari tabard, so you know this one is a TBC one. Let's look at the stats here. So these are the same items. I didn't change anything here. And you can see he still has 11% hit chance and also 24.89% crit chance. Even though we have like ratings on these items instead of like percentage-based buffs. So for you, what this means is basically if you bring your character into TBC, into the pre-patch, you don't really need to think about a lot since you are only level 60. All of these item changes, where they will get translated into ratings, are not really going to do a thing at level 60. They are pretty much like designed around 60. So what this means, we can look at Kiss of the Spider. This one gives me 1% crit, 1% hit, 20% haste. What does this mean in TBC? Let's look at the TBC version. It gives me 14% crit, 10 hit rating, 200 haste. This basically means, however, you need 14 critical strike rating for 1% crit at level 60. You need 10 hit rating for 1% hit chance at level 60. And you need 200 haste rating for 20% haste at level 60. Really, really important at level 60. I will show you also an example soonish where all of these stats are going to get fumbled and jumbled around when you are going to level. Because then everything's going to change. Ratings are pretty much bound to level. So this means when we are going to reach higher levels, you will need more ratings. One example, just from the top of my head, I can mention here. For example, for hit rating, at level 60, we need 10 hit rating for 1% hit. At level 70, we actually need 15.8 hit rating for 1% hit. So that's also why right at the start when we are going to enter Outland, as for example let's say you are this warrior, full bis everything, you're pretty much going to smash everything at level 60. You're really strong, everything's going to be really easy, and then you're going to get a few levels in and you're really going to notice, oh man, I feel like kind of weaker and weaker. This is pretty much true because, again, you will need more and more ratings to achieve the same amount of crit you had before. So yeah, we will get nerfed and nerfed and nerfed until we are level 70, and then we can actually finally get some previous pieces which have a lot more ratings on them. And that's also where the kind of meme, but it also has some truth, comes from, where people are saying, you don't really need to care about your gear. You replace anything while you are questing and so on anyway, because these items have like way more stats on them. Everything's like power crept. This is true for some pieces, but not for everything. It's like a case by case basis. For example, one of the more, I would say, pretty easy examples here is like this ring here, Band of Unnatural Forces. This is actually you pre-rate this ring in TBC, since the amount of stats you're going to get from this is like, there's not really anything that rivals it, unless you want to spend a lot of badges maybe on the ring. But yeah, that's just as an example. But yeah, you will 100% replace some of the gear here while you are leveling. No doubt about it. Yeah. One other thing that is also pretty interesting is most of the enchants that have percentage-based buffs on them are actually still going to have these buffs. So for example, you can see it right here on the cloak. This one still has 2% reduced threat on it, even though we are in TBC right now, which you can see here. That is true for most enchants. One other prominent one I want to mention here, which will probably have some pretty important value in TBC, is this one, Enchant Gloves Threat. This one basically just gives you 2% threat from all attacks and spells, and this is a pretty broken enchant, I would say, for like tanks, since this is still a percentage-based buff, and yeah, this one we can get in vanilla right now. I can pull this one up. Let's see where I can find it. You can see this one drops in Anki Rush. There's a vendor that gives you this? This is new to me. Okay, I didn't know that. But yeah, basically we can get this one in AQ40. So yeah, this is of course something that will still have some value. So if you have this enchant, maybe keep, I would say 100% try to keep it. Some of the enchants are still really nice going into TBC that are from Classic. One of the more famous examples out of that is actually the Shoulder enchant. Mike of the Scourge. I talked about this in my things you can bring into TBC. The funny thing about this enchant is it actually got nerfed a bit. So this one in Classic has actually 26 attack power, 1% crit, but in TBC it has 26 attack power, 14 critical strike rating. However, even with that nerf, it is still going to be the best enchant you can get on your shoulders. So maybe try to keep one of these if you can, for a really good pair of shoulders in TBC that you are going to keep using for a very long time. Maybe tier 4 if you want to do that. But yeah, it's just something I want to mention here also as well. Good, so that was like a kind of an example. So basically you don't really need to worry about going into the pre-patch with your current gear. The stats will pretty much stay the same. This is also same case for like casters and such. Some stats are going to get changed a bit, so you can see one thing. I have actually more avoidance on this character than I would have in Classic, so, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, some of the tanking stats and so on are going to get changed. So this is also something I want to mention here as well. Good, so we have that explained as well. Now I want to show you some examples where what would happen if I would increase the level of this warrior here. This is true for other classes as well, not only warrior, but of course if you are like a caster, instead of hit chance you would have like spell hit and so on, and the values are slightly different as well, like the amount of spell hit you would need for 1% and the spell crit. So right here I have like a button and I can press this one and actually level up my warrior. So let's do this. So let's say we are going to hit 61. What would happen to us? You can see we already lost some hit chance here, and we already lost some crit chance here. This will be true for every single level. And one thing I can just show you here immediately, just to skip all of the leveling, is let's just turn this character into level 70 instead. So if this character is going to hit level 70, we actually will get massive nerfs. So we lost a lot of stats. So first of all, we only have like roughly 7% hit chance anymore, and we only have 16.47% crit chance anymore. So yeah, we lost a lot of stats here compared to the vanilla version. This pretty much means we need to gain like tons of stats. Again, like when we are at level 70, we actually need to get a lot of new items here to get to the old stats again. But yeah, that's just something I wanted to show you here as well. Pretty simple demonstration, just so you have some general idea. I think, like I saw a lot of videos talking about stat changes and so on. But again, I kind of didn't really find anything that was really going into more detail and so on, which is also something that's not that easy to do. But I think this pretty much perfectly shows you, okay, how does the ratings are going to affect my stats going into TBC, into the pre-patch. Now I want to talk about some new stats. I kind of led into this previously, but now I want to talk about these fully. Some of the new stats you can already see here. We have like armor penetration, expertise, and things like haste. Some stats are completely new. Some stats are pretty much the old ones, but more prevalent. And I want to go over some here. So first of all, let's talk about one completely new stat, which is going to be resilience. Let me just pop this one up here. So there's, for example, an enchant, which gives you some resilience rating. Resilience, what it does, is pretty simple. Basically, we can also look at this guide here, which is, I think, more easy digestible. Wait, are these stats? Oh, this is actually the wrong one. My bad. I wanted to go over here, and now I want to go over stats. Oh, I didn't really prep this. Yeah, but basically we have a stat which is called resilience. And what this stat does, they basically introduced the stat for like PvP. But you probably know the stat from like later expansions as well. This is, unless you want to talk about like even newer expansions, and for example in MOP, I saw it's like a PvP power. But like for TBC and Rev, we had like resilience. So what resilience basically does is it gives you some crit immunity. The TBC version is slightly different from the Rev one, where you can actually use this one in PvE, and it's actually really valuable. So it does actually two things. So first of all, it gives you some less chance to get crit, and this in combination with defense pretty much gives you like an easier way to reach like the defense cap, the crit immunity cap, where you can't be crit anymore, which is really important on a tank, of course. Resilience is, of course, more of a tank stat, unless you, of course, you care about PvP, then you would use this in PvP. Also, what it does, it reduces the damage you receive when you are going to get crit. And this is, of course, more important than PvP, since you will pretty much use resilience to reach the crit cap as in tank in PvE. But it's actually really valuable, and the amount of crit immunity you gain from resilience is actually a ton. So yeah, you will use some of the PvP gear, and especially as like a protection warrior, there are some like previous sets and so on you can get, which actually use a lot of the PvP pieces. So you reach that cap way easier. Since you could also reach that with defense, but it is like you would actually need a pretty big amount of defense to reach that, and resilience can help that by like it can help you a lot to reach that way faster than you would be just from your defense alone. Yeah, just so you have that as well. So that's one of the stats we will see in TBC, which is new. We also have some other stats. We have one stat that already existed in vanilla, and I can just pull up the classic version here. So for example, we have Badge of the Sworn God. This item gave you some armor penetration, and there are like two different types of armor penetration in the game. We have things like thunder armor, improved exposed armor, or like in general just exposed armor, which reduce the amount of armor of the enemy for everyone. Also things like there's like an axe you can craft, which is this one-handed axe, which reduces the enemy's armor by 200, stacks up to 3 times. These kind of items and effects and thunder armor and such are of course general for everyone. But we also had stuff like Badge of the Swarm Guard, which reduced armor penetration only for yourself. So only your attacks would ignore a certain amount of armor. Badge of the Swarm Guard of course had this effect, 200 of your own attacks, and this can stack of course like 6 times. These kind of effects were pretty useless however, since if you had like decent group and all of the correct debuffs, you could make it so that even the highest amount of armor mobs would actually be close to 0 armor. This means, I think the number was like around 3,700, if I'm correct, around there, which was like the highest amount of armor. There were bosses which had less armor, but basically if you used Curse of Wreck, Fairy Fire, and improved exposed armor, it would go closely to, I think it was 77 armor. So that's basically almost 0. So that's where these kind of effects are pretty useless, since it's already really close to 0. It would be way better to use more of an other trinket, more of an offensive other item. These kind of items were of course really useful on trash or on bosses where you can't really have these effects up permanently, like for example twins and like Scarum and things like with a lot of ads. But one important thing, we didn't really have anything that had passive armor penetration on it. All of the stuff we have here, also one other item we have like Bone Reaver's Edge. Yeah, Bone Reaver. Had the same thing, also gave you some armor penetration with a proc, but nothing was like passively. Nothing was like, okay, you're always going to ignore a certain amount of armor when you are going to use this earpiece. Now let me switch over TBC, and that's where we will see a change. This is not really a new stat, but we will see this stat actually way more often, and the passive stat is actually completely new, I would say. We don't really have that in vanilla right now. So for example, we have this ring here, Stormrage Signet. This ring gives you some hit rating, some attack power, and also what it does, it gives you some armor penetration. Basically it says your attacks ignore 126 of your opponent's armor. This is really, really simple. The stat, how it works, basically it does what it says. Your attacks ignore, if you would use this ring, you would pretty much ignore 126 armor of the enemy. That's it. Now you would maybe think, okay, is this even useful in vanilla? Like armor penetration items and so on were pretty useless. We didn't really use them, like things like badge or whatever. If we had like a, let's say, min-max group or whatever with an exposed rogue and so on. This will change in TBC massively. So one important thing is armor will get insanely upgraded for all of the different bosses and enemies. Right now we have like a, I would say, pretty low amount of armor. Like I said previously, we can get it as low as 77 for like the highest amount of armor bosses, which are also pretty much most of them. However, in TBC, this is a whole different story. In TBC, the highest armor bosses will actually have 7,700 armor. I'm not sure if I can actually show you some armor amounts here or armor values here. Maybe if I look at Illidan. Sadly not, I guess. Would be nice to see some of the stats here, but no, I can't. This one. No, there's not really a way I can view it. I would probably need to open the simulation tool, and then we can actually would be able to look at the armor. But for example, Illidan has like around 7,700 armor. Other bosses have around like 6,200 armor, around that amount. But yeah, a lot of armor. This leads to one of the problems in the game. Basically, even with all of the debuffs we currently even have, we can't really reduce the amount of armor to really 0 or close to 0. We can't really get to like 77, which we had before. Even if you use an improved exposed armor, even if you use Verifier and Curse of Wreck, not really possible anymore. So that's why we have items like Stone Ridge Signets. And it is actually possible to have so much armor penetration that when you are fighting a boss which has like a lower amount of armor, not really Illidan, for example, it is pretty much possible to ignore all of the enemy armor if you include all of the debuffs and so on. So yeah, we won't see a lot of the armor penetration items at the start of TBC, so like in phase 1 and so on, and phase 2 we won't really see that. But in phase 3 there's actually a lot of it. So yeah, also one really cool item is this one. Yeah, this one is just insane. You can see, for example, this is kind of like Bone Reverse, where you had this armor penetration on, but this one is just always active. Always 335. But this sword looks insane. Look at this, man. Damn. This one drops in Hygiene. If you didn't know. But yeah, coming into phase 3, you will have access to a lot of armor penetration. And yeah, that's really a really nice thing. I really like armor penetration. It's just a really fun stat to use, since you can really feel the amount of damage you feel that. Also, when you are fighting Illidan, you will see you will do way less damage to him than other bosses. It's just pretty much because of his armor. But yeah, this is something more of a hidden thing. But I also wanted to talk about it here in this video. That's also the reason why Badge of the Swarm God is way more usable in TBC, since you can actually reduce a lot of the armor of the bosses, which you couldn't really do before. So with that item, if the fight is actually short enough, you can reach a pretty respectable amount of armor penetration. And yeah, if you use that item. Good. So I have that as well. So I have explained armor penetration. One other stat we also have is actually haste. This is again an item which we already had in vanilla, and actually this stat was way more prevalent in vanilla. So basically, for example, we had items like Kiss of the Spider, which have of course a haste, which you can see here, Mind Quickening Gem, everything like that. But we will have more access to haste in general in TBC. Things like, for example, one thing we have here is DST, so that would be Dragon's Shrine Trophy. This one is of course one of the most famous trinkets we have. This one, for example, has like a proc which gives you a lot of haste, 325. So yeah, there's going to be a lot more haste available in TBC. It's not really a new stat, we already have haste in vanilla, but there's also something I wanted to just quickly talk about here. One completely new stat we will see is actually expertise. This is a stat which is going to replace weapon skill. So for example, we have the Hunger and Cold here. This item, basically what it did is it gave you +6 swords in Classic. You can see it right here. However, now you see something new, which is expertise rating. Now you would maybe think, okay, what does this mean? Expertise is something... Sorry. I need to drink a bit. But yeah, basically, this is something that is actually kind of simple to explain, but there's like a lot of different information about this. But how it basically works in Classic is all of the items that had weapon skill are going to have expertise. All of them. So you can even think about things like Edge Masters, which is of course one of the more famous ones. It's going to get expertise. Doesn't matter what type of weapon skill they had. So if it's axes, maces, whatever, Doesn't matter. It's all going to be expertise. So, for example, this item we had in Anubis of Warhammer. Whatever, not this item then. This one, for example, had like dagger skill on it, expertise. So all of these items are going to, get changed again. We are not going to have access to any amount of weapon skill anymore from gear or even passives or whatever, racials at all. We are just always going to rock the same default amount of weapon skill. This means at level 60, when we are going into the pre-patch, we are stuck at 300 weapon skill. At level 60, of course. I will explain why this is really important when I talk about more warrior-related stuff. But this new stat does pretty much different things than weapon skill does. It's pretty much a completely different thing, and I will also explain that as well here. Basically, what expertise does is, you can imagine it like that. Whenever we would hit like an enemy, there's of course like a huge attack table we are going to need to consider. But one thing that was kind of annoying is when the enemy dodged our attacks. We had some chances where we could reduce that amount of dodge when we got like more weapon skill. It got slightly reduced, but we could never completely eliminate the dodge chance. It was not something that was really possible for just weapon skill alone. Parry was something we could of course completely eliminate if you would attack the boss from behind. However, if you are a tank, that's not something we can do, obviously. And parry is not affected by weapon skill. This is a common misconception I see like a lot. But yeah, weapon skill has nothing to do with parry. Like, nothing. We can't really reduce the amount of parry at all. It's always going to be the base amount of number. I don't really remember the exact number. I would need to look that up, but whatever. It doesn't really matter for this one. However, expertise actually gives us the ability, if we have enough of it, we can make it so the enemy is not going to be able to dodge our attacks anymore, as well as not going to be able to parry our attacks anymore if we even get more expertise. There are some certain caps of it, but that's basically what it does. It reduces the dodge chance and also the parry chance, which is really, really important. Of course, as DPS players, we really don't want to have any of these annoying dodges anymore. And as tanks, we don't want to have these dodges and also parries, even more importantly. Since parrying the boss, especially with all of the TBC bosses being way more dangerous, they are going to hit really hard, way harder than vanilla. It is really important that we don't parry haste them. So that is something that is a pretty important stat cap for tanks. And you can see this in all different tanking guides. One of the top things you always need to consider gearing for. We can also look at this here for tank protection warriors, for example. This is something they need to care about a lot. Here, you can see expertise soft cap. We definitely want to reach this. This is of course for threat, but you also have like for mitigation, you also want to reach that. This is a really nice table for this, but I will talk about that because there's like another table which is even more has even more things on it. So yeah, but that's pretty much what it does. This is the new stat we will receive here. Weapon skills pretty much gone, and also items which gave you pure weapon skill are going to receive like have way less value on it. So Edge Masters, if you have it right now, definitely try to sell it before the pre-patch comes out. Or if you go to Era, bring it into Era, and you can sell it there, of course, for way more gold than currently on Anniversary. But yeah, just saying, Edge Masters, of course, is something that is not going to be used at level 70 or even at level 60 in the pre-patch, to be honest. Good. So we have that as well. Now, if you remember, maybe from my other videos, when I talked about a lot of the different stats we have in vanilla, which are important, I always said weapon skill is pretty much your most important stat you want to gear for. You always want to have like at least 5 weapon skill. One thing where you could get that from is of course your racial. So what happens with racials? Do they still have weapon skill on it? No, actually not. Which is something that is pretty funny. So let's look at X specialization, because one time I want to talk about orcs instead. This is also going to give you expertise. And there's a slight difference, there's a pretty big difference between having expertise and expertise rating. Expertise, of course, is the more important one. Expertise rating, if you have enough of it, it's around 4 at level 70. That will get translated into 1 expertise. So yeah, having access to 5 already just from your racial is pretty big. It's not that massive as weapon skill was. That was pretty dominating for the whole game. It pretty much, if you didn't play the correct race, I would say, you really need to get your weapon skill from somewhere else, and it was really, really important and a pretty big issue. That's not something that is going to be the thing in TBC anymore. Expertise, these ratios are still pretty useful, especially right at the start, since gaining a lot of expertise at the start is really difficult. For example, the items are pretty rare already. One of the items, for example, you could get is cleft hoof hide leggings. This one comes from a quest. You can see it gives you some expertise rating, but there's also like a ring, which a lot of people will want to get, which is like you would need lower city exalted. That's like a reputation in TBC, and you would need to spam a lot of dungeons and so on to get that onto exalted. Maybe I can actually show you that ring. Where is it? Shapeshifter Signet, exactly. This gives you 20 expertise rating. This is a pretty important ring for a lot of classes to really cap that expertise. But if you have the racial, you are kinda in luck. Maybe you don't really need to get this ring, and you can kinda just go to Revered and be done with it. But it really depends what kind of gear and so on you are using. Of course, you also need to use the correct weapons then. So if you have X specialization, you would use X's to make usage of that expertise. But that's something I will go over in a bit when I talk about the stats in more detail. That's how this basically works. Now, if you maybe listened, or if you already know your stuff about vanilla, but you are not really familiar with TBC maybe, you would already think about, okay, I said previously, we don't have any access to weapon skill anymore. So, isn't that a problem? Because we didn't really get weapon skill for like the dodge or whatever. That wasn't really a thing. We got the weapon skill because of the glancing blows. In vanilla, there's a pretty high chance against raid bosses that our attacks are going to be glancing blows. And also, what weapon skill did is it reduced the amount of hit we would need from our gear. So we could solve 2 problems at once. That's where weapon skill was really, really nice, and a pretty broken stat overall. Now, since we don't have it and we are stuck at the base amount, isn't that a problem? Aren't we stuck at the glancing blow penalty of before? Are we not going to do way less damage? Yes and no. So let me explain you something. So basically, we have this pretty nice write-up from Meiji again. If you remember when I did my vanilla videos and talked about some of the stats here of vanilla, I also used this one, but for vanilla. And this is a TBC version. I will link this one also in the description, so you can look at it if you want to read through this. There's a lot of really valuable information if you already want to prepare for TBC and such. But if you look at the glancing penalty, the formulas are different from vanilla for both chance and damage penalty. And we can just look at this. The thing that is important to us is this one. Unless you're going to bring out an SOD TBC, maybe this one would be more important then. Since what this basically means is how much is the difference in level. Raid bosses almost always have a 3-level difference. Unless we are going to talk about SOD, then they had like a 2-level difference, like the leveling rate. But yeah, so this one is the most important one, this row here. This means when we are going to fight the raid boss, the delta between, like the difference between our weapon skill and the defense of the boss is going to be 15. And the glance chance is actually going to be 24%. If you remember in vanilla, it was a way higher amount. It was like around 40-30%. So this is already a nerf here. This pretty much means basically we will see way less glancing blows in general. We couldn't really reduce the chance in vanilla. That was not something we could do. However, what we could reduce is the penalty. This penalty, again, oh, something broke here. Yeah, this penalty is something that got also reduced. It is only 25%. If we remember in vanilla, if we had 300 weapon skill and if we would attack a raid boss and our attack would glance, the penalty was 35%. It would lose 35% of its damage. This, of course, only relates to like white attacks, but it is really important since that's where most of our rage is coming from. So if we have just 35% less damage from our auto attacks, we are going to have way less rage than if we would have otherwise. For example, if you only would get 5 more weapon skill, which you would have gotten from our racial in vanilla, that penalty would already be only 15% and not 35 anymore. So yeah, pretty big, massive difference. That's why weapon skill was so insanely important. But overall, you can see weapons, the glancing penalty is pretty much nerfed overall. We will see less glancing blows and we will, like the penalty is not that harsh anymore. One big important thing here, we can't do anything about this anymore. Since there's no way to get any amount of weapon skill anymore, this is pretty much stuck. This is something we will always be, have kind of a problem with. We can't do anything about this. So this will always something that is in the game. I would personally not really think about it anymore, since yeah, you can't really do anything about it. We don't have access to weapon skill anymore. It's always going to be like the same amount. So it's also, of course, also kind of luck based. But it won't affect us as hard anymore as it was in vanilla, since we will see way less glancing blows. This leads to a lot of different things. One of the important things here is hit rating. So if you remember right, I also talked about this before. But basically, let me scroll up a bit. I don't want to scroll too fast because I already had like I remember one comment in one of my videos pretty much said I scroll way too fast. And it's not really good on the eyes. So I will try to scroll a bit slower. But here we have, for example, the missed chance. There are some slight changes in the missed chance. And one really big one. But what I mean is just from the calculation and so on. The calculation is not really that important for us. Basically, we can just look at this table. One thing we already had, which was a pretty big benefit from weapon skill, was if we got 5 weapon skill, like additionally from somewhere, at least 5, we could reduce the amount of hit we would need to make it so our yellow abilities, or like just our abilities, wouldn't be able to be missed. Things like your heroic strike, bloodthirst, whatever. This is of course really important. But in TBC we won't have access to weapon skill anymore, so we are stuck at the 300 at level 60, for example. This means, just from the get-go, we will need 9% hit. Just the same thing as you had when you were using 300 weapon skill. Yeah, and you didn't have like any access to more additional weapon skill. Same thing is pretty much true here as well. But I always, of course, said it's not really worth to go for 9% hit. Just get your weapon skill from somewhere if you can, and then use that, because the glancing blow penalty is just way too big. However, no, we don't have any access to like weapon skill anymore. We can't really reduce the glancing blow, whatever. And we always need to reach that 9% hit cap. Whatever we do, it's always a thing. There are ways to reduce that, but I will get into that in a bit. So this one is also, again, really important to us. At the level difference at 3, so which is this one, which is pretty much true for raid bosses. Raid bosses are always 3 level higher than us. The delta difference between our defense and the weapon skill is 15. The miss chance is 8% and the hit cap's 9%. Now you would maybe ask, okay, why do we need an additional 1%? All of the other things are not really, there's like no additional one we would need here. The problem here is, this is also the same thing in vanilla as well. You would actually only, like the miss chance actually only 8%, but you still need 9%. It's kind of weird, but I will explain it now. Basically how it works is, since the delta, like the difference between our weapon skill and the amount of defense from the boss is so high, it's like 15, that means 1% of our hit is actually ignored. So that's why we need 9% and not 8%. Yeah, it's kind of weird, but that's how it works. Basically, you can just remember, I always need 9% hit. One important thing, however, here is, if you maybe thought about it a bit, we are kinda more free with this. One thing that was always kind of true in vanilla, if you manage to reach that 9% hit, you could use other weapons. You would still do way less damage because of the glancing penalty, but you could actually use other weapons which ran from your racial or from your edge masters or whatever. Same thing is true here, but even more so. Since the glancing blow penalty and so on is way lower, we will have access to weapons which are not even from our racial and so on. We can actually use them and not lose a lot on damage on. For example, for me right now, I have like the Hatchet of Sun and Bone, which I got recently, but since I'm a human, I can't really use that weapon. And I could get Edge Masters and whatever, but yeah, it's kind of annoying. However, when the Prepatch is going to hit, I can actually use this weapon. Since the glancing blow penalty is way lower, doesn't really matter that much anymore. All I would lose out is on some expertise rating. That's even true for one weapon type that is ignored a lot in vanilla and pretty much unused. If you already know, maybe you already know, but there's, for example, one weapon type which is not used at all, and let me pull up Kill Jaden, for example, because he drops one, which is actually, no, wait, I remember the name. No? Was it not that one? Whatever, I will just pull up Kill Jaden. Where is he? Come on, man. This boss is so cool. I love fighting him, but he's insanely difficult. It's actually crazy. Oh, Hand of Deceiver, sorry. This is a fist weapon. Now you would maybe think, if you are thinking about vanilla, or maybe you're a vanilla purist, you would already be like, oh man, fist weapon. Since fist weapons are useless in vanilla, you won't really use them on a warrior at all, since there's like no weapon skill anywhere. That's also something I don't know if they did that in SOD or what, but I think they did actually. I think you could actually get some weapon skill for every type of weapon. But yeah, this is something, for example, for Classic Plus that they could easily introduce. But yeah, Hand of Deceiver is a pretty insanely strong fist weapon, and we can use this as warriors. Isn't that nice? Like using actually fist weapons as a warrior. And like, of course, there's no racial in the game, so we would need to get our expertise rating from somewhere. But the glancing blow penalty and so on is the same for every type of weapon. Doesn't really matter what we use. So we can perfectly use fist weapons. And some of the fist weapons look really cool. This one, for example, looks pretty cool. There are like a lot of really strong fist weapons you can use. This opens up a lot more weapon types for, of course, a lot of different classes. For rogues, for warriors. For, of course, red paladins, arms warriors, whatever, doesn't really matter. Yeah, this is of course a really big change. Weapons are not really that ham-fisted anymore. Still, you kind of still, if you can, you want to use types which you have your ratio on, since that would allow you to get need to get less expertise, especially at the start. But it isn't that big of a problem anymore. You will see like a lot of like orc warriors with swords, and you will see like a lot of humans with axes and whatever. This is not something that is really a big deal anymore. So this is a pretty perfect change in my personal opinion. But yeah, that is something we need to get here. We need to get 9% hit. That is pretty important. But this opens up a lot of different weapon types. One other thing is, I talked about this previously, 9% seems pretty harsh. You would think. But are there any ways we can use maybe some types that can help us, some stuff that can help us with that? Say maybe some consumables or whatever. There are some buffs we can use. So one of the easier ones, for example, would be this one. Improved Fairy Fire. This is like talent they can, like druids can get. Of course, they can apply Fairy Fire, but they also have this talent here. Basically, what it does is, whenever Fairy Fire is on the enemy, it pretty much increases the chance that the target will get hit by melee and rage attack by 3%. Meaning, if this debuff is on the enemy and the druid also has improved Fairy Fire, this is really important, of course, we only need 6% hit and not 9% anymore, which is pretty big already. Like 3% hit reduction is like pretty huge. However, you can't always rely on this unless if you are playing with the same people all the time, and this druid has pretty much this one permanently up all the time. Then you can pretty much just go for 6% and use maybe other gear, which would help you getting more damage off. One other thing, which is of course, I think more people remember this one, is actually Heroic Presence. This is a racial of Draenei's. So Draenei's are a new race that will be coming in TBC, and they have this racial. It is a pretty strong racial. Basically what it does, it increases the chance to hit by 1% for you and all party members within 30 yards. However, this is really important, really important. This is only going to be the case if the Draenei in your party is a certain class. So he needs to be a warrior, paladin, or a hunter. If he isn't, yeah, you are not going to get this buff and you're going to get something else. So let's say he's a shaman, which of course he's going to be. You will have like one enhanced shaman in your group. He's going to give you this buff, Inspiring Presence. This one will give you 1% spell hit. And this is of course really useless for warriors, really useful for spellcasters. So they want to have that. But this is another thing where you can kind of optimize your groups. You can see, oh, this guy is a red paladin Draenei. Let's put him into the melee group and replace him with like the human. Like let's replace some people here, replace some people here. And you can see, yeah, you can kind of mix and match so you get the correct racial passive. Since again, it's pretty much different for what classes they play. So yeah, if they are like more of a spellcaster types, they will have Inspiring Presence. This one will give you 1% spell hit. If they are more of a melee character or like physical DPS, like a hunter, it will give you 1% hit instead. Actually, I've kind of forgot that runners could even be hunters. I'm so used to seeing like Night Death hunters everywhere. But yeah, this is something that is true for this case. So you also have that one as well. So these are like two ways where you can make it a bit easier to get that hit cap. So if you're always going to play with the same people again, and you have like a Draenei, warrior, paladin, or hunter in your group, hunters of course a bit more difficult. One important thing I forgot to mention, for hunters, they will receive a lot of changes as well for like, which makes them a lot easier to play. Since, for example, the death zone is going to get massively reduced, and this also means, of course, like this one will be way easier to be up, since I can actually be closer to the boss with all of the other melees, and this is also a pretty important change here. So yeah, they also have access to that, which is pretty nice. And you will see experienced hunters, like really good hunters, pretty much melee weaving, where they will go like when their auto attacks are pretty much down, they will go in melee attack and then go back again. And then just auto attack again and do this throughout the whole fight, whatever. This is something you will also see. That's pretty much because of the dead zone range. You could also do that in vanilla, but this was way more difficult because of the dead zone range. But yeah, that's something we have here as well. So that's where the hit rating becomes a lot different. So basically, if you have this warrior here, okay, now he's like level 70. Let's turn him to level 60 again. So yeah, now you get like shrunken down again. Maybe he hacked or something, so got reverted by Blizzard. Who knows? But yeah, if this warrior would hit TBC in the pre-patch and you would do like next rammers and such, you are still going to be good. He is like 11% hit chance. He's still good. But if he had like different gear, let's say he doesn't have TFT, he has like Mark of the Champion. Now he has like 9%, pretty close. But let's say he also doesn't have Kiss of the Spider, he has maybe Slayer's Crest. Now we have a problem. Now we need to get hit from somewhere. But yeah, there are like easy ways to get hit in vanilla. There's so much gear with hit, so don't sweat it. You probably have something. But remember, if you have hit gear that is pretty strong, don't throw it away. So because in the pre-patch it will become way more important, since you will need way more hit. So things like rings which had hit on them will of course be really important. Things like, for example, this one, or yeah, this one is of course really easy to get as well. So yeah, don't throw away a lot of the gear because you might need it. One important thing where you can just put it on is just on your like ranged weapon. So put on a striker's mark and then you are going to be good anyway. But that's something I just wanted to explain here really quickly, so you have that as well here. One thing, of course, this is not going to be like the optimal set in the pre-patch. I talked about this in my like warrior changes video, but you are like using Hunger and Cold, and this one gives expertise. And expertise is a pretty valuable stat, don't get me wrong, but you would probably be better off to just use something like a Castigator, or like a Headshot of Sun and Bone, something that does a lot of damage, since again you want to use 2 slow weapons whenever you can, since Whirlwind is going to hit way harder with that. Maybe you have like a misplaced servo arm, would of course also be something you can use there. One set I didn't talk about in detail is expertise, so let me do that. Expertise. Let's talk about expertise. A pretty huge table, a lot of information, and yeah, let's talk about this. All of these hit tables are also made for level 70, for like level 70 warriors and so on. So it is going to be a bit different at level 60, but at the end we can kind of experiment and look at how would it look like the amount of expertise we would have at level 60. But yeah, expertise, how it works. Basically, if you have 4 expertise rating, you will pretty much gain 1 expertise skill. At level 60, it's more around like 3.33, but that's kind of the same thing. You would still kind of need 4. Expertise is pretty harsh on the amount of rating conversion to a real expertise. We can also read it here. So here, basically it says, note that the conversion from rating to skill is done in whole skill points, meaning that any fractional part is rounded down. This basically means if you would have 39 expertise rating, this would translate to 9.89 expertise skill, but you would only get 9 from it, since it gets rounded down. So basically you would need a bit more expertise rating to get like to 10, and then you are good. So this is pretty harsh. I remember, 2 things I remember in TBC Classic was, I was like thinking, man, I have so much expertise. everything's good and so on. And then I was thinking, oh, it's actually expertise rating and not really expertise. So I actually need way more. So that was one of the big noob mistakes I made first. But yeah, it's pretty confusing. Expertise rating, expertise. You actually need, yeah, kind of, like you need to look at which cap you are going to look at. Expertise rating cap is of course going to be way higher than expertise. But that's the first noob mistake I made. And also kind of I was thinking, I'm going to use this one, which gives you a lot of expertise rating. And then I look at my description and my character, and I don't see the needle moving at all. I still have like the same amount of expertise. Or like only I got like one more. So yeah, that is pretty much the reason. You actually need a ton of expertise to like gain a lot, since yeah, this is really harsh, like it gets rounded down. But that's just something we are going to deal with. We have some different things we can use, however, as warriors, for example. Other classes have as well, but this is more focused on warriors here. But also racial abilities as well. So let's look at this table. So we have this one, 4 rating is 1 skill. This means a 0.25 reduction of like pretty much dodge and parry. So we have that. If we have our racial as well, we get 5 expertise. This is like a 1.25 reduction. However, all of this doesn't really matter that much. Let's look at some more important rows here. So this is a really important one. This one is a dodge cap. So if we have the racial and we have 2 into weapon mastery, which is a talent, I can show you. One moment, I can show you the talent. This is a talent we can grab as warriors. This is in the Fury tree. Basically, it gives us pretty much the abilities that, it pretty much gives us 2% dodge reduction. We can skill this 2 times for 2%, so each one gives us 1. And this is really, really useful. You will see why this is really useful pretty much in the table. But yeah, this is just a talent we can grab. So if we have the racial, let's say we are a human and we are going to use swords or maces, and we have this talent maxed, we only need 52 expertise rating or 13 expertise. Like an additional, of course. This is already like pre-calculated. So this is the additional rating we would need from our gear. That is, of course, way easier to reach than some of the other caps. So it is not that harsh if you are like a human or orc and use like the weapons and also, of course, use these talents. Same thing if you are like a tank. Tanks have like a similar talent, but the talent is a bit worse. So you already remember Defiance. Defiance in vanilla, what it used to give you, that you could skill it 5 times, and it gave you just flat threat generation. Same thing in TBC, however we can only skill it 3 times, but we will get more threat, so it's pretty much the same thing. But we will also gain 6 expertise, just like that. It's also slightly nerfed, since it only works in defensive stance. But yeah, I will make a separate video about talents, because they are like also pretty... There's like a lot to talk about talents. But yeah, we will also get 6 expertise if we max this one. Expertise, not expertise rating. So yeah, this one is really good. So just with our racial and with this talent max, we have 11 expertise already, which is pretty huge. But yeah, basically we would then need an additional 60 expertise rating or 15 expertise from other gear, which is of course also easier. That's of course important for the dodge cap. If we are not using the racial, this is also really important for every other race, which is not a human or orc. Or you're human or orc and you use different weapons. Then you would need, if you use a talent 2 into weapon mastery, you would 71 and 18 expertise. You can see like all of these numbers here. But yeah, it pretty much goes down here. And the general dodge cap is this one. So basically, raid bosses at 73, so yeah, when we are 70 and we are fighting raid bosses, they have a 6.5% chance to dodge. And each point of expertise pretty much reduces that amount of dodge by 0.25%. So when we have 103 rating or 26 expertise, we only need, we are pretty much done, and the enemy can't dodge anymore. They can't dodge our attacks anymore. One thing that isn't mentioned here, what would happen if you would only use the racial without this talent, or any talent, then you would be at 21. Pretty much you would only need 21 expertise. This is already like a pretty nice reduction already. But yeah, just something that is really not mentioned here. After that, it becomes important for tanks. So all of this is important for tanks, since there's also a parry cap. The chance to parry is higher than dodge, so that's why we will need more expertise to reach that. So the easiest one to reach is pretty much this one. It's the lowest amount we can be like, we can parry capped. Parry capped. This would be with our racial and free into defiance. Since as a tank you won't really use weapon mastery. That's not something you can do. Again, Fury Prot is pretty much kill, so they are gone. You won't really use it. Unless maybe so for some... Actually, I don't know. Since we will get post-nerf bosses, maybe. But yeah, especially at the start, I don't think anyone's going to be tanky enough to use Fury Prot. But I'm not sure. Maybe something will change. Maybe something will surprise me. Wouldn't be the first time. But yeah, you would of course use free and free into defiance, since general really good talent. So this would be of course your cap if you are going to use your racial. Let's say you are a human, you are just going to use a sword. It's a bit weird to use dual wielded weapons. How it gets like calculated and such. But yeah, in general, I would always recommend using things like add-ons and weak auras for all of these ratings, because like doing everything in your head and just reading it from the item card and such is can be pretty cumbersome too. If you are not using the racial, you would be here, and the general parry cap like is 14%. So you need enough expertise to make this, to go all the way to here, to pretty much reduce the amount of parry to 0 from 14%. And again, you get 0.25 of a reduction for parry and dodge per expertise. So we would need 56 expertise or 221 expertise rating. Again, this is something that is pretty difficult to reach at the start. There will be only a couple of items that even give you expertise. I don't even remember any of them existing in raids at the start. I remember the Lower City one, and I remember the Cleft Hoof Hide leggings. But later on, their like expertise is way more abundant. For example, we have this one, Shard of Contempt, which drops in the last phase in a dungeon. In a new dungeon we will get. In this one, you can see 44 expertise rating. So yeah, if you use this, you're already GG's. You don't really need a lot more already. But yeah, this is just something we have here as well listed. So that's something that is pretty useful. This table in general, you can always look at it, look through it. Again, this is only for level 70, but I would always recommend, if you're kind of struggling with that, you can use like gear builders and things like that. For example, this character here is of course level 60, and this is really important for the amount of ratings. Since this, even expertise changes slightly. I think at level 60 it's around 3.33 amount of expertise rating per point of expertise. So if I would increase this one, we have like 10 right now. Yeah, let me level this up. Still 10. Still 10. But it should go... Yeah, now it's 9. You see? Like, we lose out on a lot of, on a bit on expertise on every level. And I think at level 70 it's like, of course, even a bit lower. But one funny thing I want to show you at the end maybe a bit. Is it possible to reach the expertise cap at level 60? Can we make it so when we are going to do any next rammers and so on? Is it possible to have it where the enemy is not going to be able to dodge our attacks anymore? That is something we can just try out here. Maybe we can actually. Remember that all of the items that had weapon skill on them previously are going to get translated to expertise. So things like Hunger and Cold, for example, is one perfect example here. Also, of course, racials again. I'm repeating myself over and over, but just something I want to mention here at the end as well. So we have that. We are at 14 expertise right now. Actually, no, 10 expertise and 14 expertise rating. Is this enough? Not really. Let's look at the table again. How much would we need again? We would need this amount pretty much. Actually, I don't know if you need, if enemies have actually less dodge at level 60. But this is a pretty nice rough point you can actually go through. So we can, I think it's, isn't it 6%? Could be 6%. So then we would actually need a bit less. But still, we would still kinda want to be here if we are using, of course, all of our stuff. So we kinda need to get a bit more. This is sadly not enough. Remember, we have like 2% additional dodge reduction from our talents. So we are like at 4.65% actually, not 2.65%. If you're using the right talents, this talent right here, we are going to use this one. But yeah, that's of course if you would use Hunger and Cold. But there's also other gear we could maybe use here. Things like there's for example like belts that give you some amount of weapon skill. Like all of the belts which gave you, like for example this one gave you a dagger skill. This of course gives you expertise rating and some crit. So right here you would be pretty close. There's some experimentation you can do, but again there are not really any sims for level 60 at TBC, like nothing like the Prepatch. So I wouldn't really recommend it. My idea would be for the Prepatch to just ditch Hunger and Cold, just use things like which have a lot more weapon damage on them, things like a Castigator or something. Like this would be pretty nice. Then you also have some amount of dodge reduction already. You get 2% from your talents, then you are like at 3.25. It's not enough, don't get me wrong. But yeah, I'm not sure how big of a difference that would make. But don't forget, the bosses are not going to stand very long. Like we will do a lot of damage to them, especially on Alliance, since we are also going to have access to Wind Fury. And also Bloodlust. Actually, no, wait, not Bloodlust. But yeah, that's something you also need to remember here. Wind Fury will be pretty nice on Alliance. So yeah, don't forget that as well. So you will do like a lot of damage. And we have a lot of other talent changes. Actually, I think we will do less damage because of wall buffs. But yeah, I haven't tested it. So this is more of speculation. Don't take anything at the end of this video pretty much for granted. This is more of like, what can we do? Maybe we can goof around with some of the stats here. But yeah, that's like not really a simulation tool where you can simulate this stuff, since yeah, it's either for level 70. If it's for level 60, it's for vanilla and not for TBC. And these are like vastly different in their stats. So yeah, that's kind of it. That's all of what I wanted to talk about here in this video. So I have pretty much explained almost all of the stats here. Some stuff I didn't really explain in detail is things like block rating, parry rating, things like that. How does this get changed in TBC, in the Prepatch and so on. But I don't want to go over every single stat and look at the ratings, because that would take like ages and this video is already way too long anyways. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, if you have anything else to say, anything else to add and so on, feel free to comment and such. I probably missed some other stuff that is also important. And I will see you in the next video. Have a great day. Goodbye.